Welcome to the Alex Jones Show on this Monday, November 24th, 2014. I'm David Knight. I'll be your host today. We're going to be joined in the second hour with Paul Joseph Watson, and in the third hour, we're going to go to our reporters in Ferguson, Missouri, Jakari Jackson and Joe Biggs. Now, they've been there all last week waiting for the grand jury verdict to see what's going to happen. It's been taking quite a while, and of course, tension is building more every day as people are getting angrier and angrier, as one person put it, getting angrier about the delay in this. We're going to talk about why it's taking so long and what is a grand jury? What is their responsibility? How are they different from a regular jury? We've seen some people say that they didn't even believe that a grand jury was the appropriate response to this. There are other ways to do this. In many states, there aren't even grand juries in the United States. So there's a lot of different ways that you can get an indictment. Of course, the prosecutor himself can do it. There's not really, even though this is a grand jury, the grand just really reflects the number of people on the jury. There's typically not a judge in control of the process. There's a prosecutor in control of the process. And so he's going to kind of present evidence to try to get what he wants to do, whether that is a prosecution or letting the person off. There are a lot of people who wish that this would go to a trial so everything could be examined there. But we're also going to be talking about what's breaking in the news. Let me give you some of the stories on Infowars.com, the breaking news there. We have a court ruling that a violent raid against homeschoolers was unconstitutional. We're going to talk about this in a lot of detail because this is really an egregious situation. The Child Protective Services and the police, essentially after harassing this family for quite some time, basically were told you're not going to come in the house again unless you've got a court order. They were coming after them for, quote, a messy house. That was the issue that they had with these homeschoolers, according to them. They did not have a search warrant. They came in and got very violent. We're going to read you exactly what they did. They've been slapped down. This is Kurt Nemo's article. They've been slapped down by the court in that state. Says that what they did was unconstitutional. They are also fighting back with a civil suit. So we're going to tell you about that. It's interesting to compare that and contrast that with what's going on, for example, in the UK with members of Parliament in Westminster in a pedophile ring 30 years ago. Of course, Scotland Yard and the press were told to cover up any mention of that. We've seen that happen with Seville, the entertainer that was there as well. But it's not just there, of course. We've had our own Franklin cover-up, our own Franklin scandal in this country. This is something that happens at the highest echelons of every government. And as the article we have up on Infowars last week pointed out, the higher up you go in governments, the more you see this kind of sexual perversion, the pedophilia. This is why it's very concerning to see them trying to intrude themselves into the lives of families using CPS. We've also seen how that plays out. There's also a report that broke today, actually on November 21st, the state of Connecticut issued a 114-page report on the shooting at Sandy Hook. Now, they're taking this in a different direction from gun control. Now they're trying to use this as a pretense to essentially enact the same kind of controls that we've seen enacted in Scotland, where you are assigned a government minder from birth until the age of 21, where government psychologists are going to come and intrude themselves into your homes because, as they pointed out, they're concerned about siloed systems of education, physical health, mental care for children. You understand what they're saying when they say siloed? They're saying, you're isolated. You're too isolated. We need to be able to come into your home at any time we wish. We need to be able to evaluate you. And of course, there's a lot involved in that. We're going to continue with the news, and we're also going to have, as I said, Jakari Jackson and Joe Biggs are in Ferguson. If we have an early verdict, we will let you know immediately what's going on there and what the verdict is. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight on this Monday, November 24th, 2014. I'm going to be joined in the second hour with Paul Joseph Watson. We're going to talk about the story that's up on Infowars.com today. Democrats have approved reparations for descendants of blacks victimized by 1898 Wilmington race riot. Let me repeat that, 1898. That's like 112 years ago or 116 years old, okay? You know, North Carolina is kind of unique in the sense that it's got more voters on the roll that are over 100, even over 112 than any other state. But I don't think there's anybody alive that is really responsible for that in North Carolina. But of course, the Democrats are trying to do some political grandstanding to appeal to their base that they have just massively betrayed with the immigration amnesty decree by Obama. It's going to be the minorities, blue-collar workers, those at the lower end of the income scale that are going to be hurt the most by this massive importation of low-cost workers. They're the ones who've been hurt the most by it to start with. So we're going to talk to Paul Joseph Watson about that. We also have an article that I want to get to about court rules violent raid against homeschoolers is unconstitutional. We're going to talk about that in depth, what really happened in this particular raid. You will not believe what happened with that. Also in Ferguson, and Jakari Jackson and Joe Biggs are going to be joining us in the third hour from Ferguson, perhaps sooner if we have a verdict there. They say the police in Ferguson violate court order by arresting journalists. That's a story that's up on Infowars.com by Steve Watson. A Ferguson mob marches in St. Louis City, shuts down a highway, and a reporter is hit in the head. We also have the Texas governor-elect plans new lawsuit against Obama. He says the president is unconstrained by the Constitution. That's Greg Abbott. He's been the Attorney General. He has sued Obama over 30 times already as Attorney General in Texas. He is the governor-elect. He was on one of the news programs yesterday. We're going to have some clips from that later on in the show. It's like a narcotic addiction. He says, Obama caps off Amnesty Immigration Week by hitting the links in Las Vegas, going golfing yet again. And of course, no surprise here, Mexico and Central America thank Obama for his amnesty decree. Yes, we've seen this before. And of course, even though the Mexican government, the Mexican president, does everything he can to educate people in Mexico about how to game our system and get on the welfare rolls, how to come in here illegally. He assists people to traverse across his country if they're coming from points south. But of course, no one is allowed to become an illegal immigrant in Mexico. The same rules do not apply there. But of course, it's only real justice if it's done here, not in Mexico. And an article from Paul Craig Roberts about what's going on continually in the Ukraine, opening the gates to World War III. Of course, we just had Paul Craig Roberts on at the end of last week. There's an interesting story, too, as we're going down the news here. Out of the UK, liberals are calling now for knife control. After getting all the guns from everybody in the UK, they've noticed that, hey, now people are being killed with knives. And of course, they get all the knives. It will be hammers or whatever. They have a new motto. They say, save a life, surrender your knife. In other words, you're the dangerous person. Evidently, you are a potential killer. And as this person who had the article here, this is EagleRising.com pointed this out. He says, why not go to the local prison and see how well knife control works? That's right. You go into a prison and they make their own knives, the shivs. So I guess maybe we could have another slogan when you go to prison. Want to live? Make a shiv. You have to have a way to protect yourself. And that's really the issue. You're always going to have violent criminal people. The question is, how do you protect yourself? That's the issue about guns, about firearms, about the right of a human being to protect yourself. We talked last week to the 90-year-old individual who's gone up against the police multiple times in order to feed the homeless. I really, really appreciate what he's done there. But in the course of the conversation, he came out, it came out that he was a former police commissioner. And he says, we got to get over, and he started going off on self-defense because I guess of the Trayvon Martin situation. But, that's just it. Self-defense is self-defense. You have a jury decide if somebody acted in legitimate self-defense or if they were the aggressor. We have to be able to make that determination, not just say nobody is going to have the means to defend themselves. So, that's a situation that needs to be decided on a case-by-case basis. And, of course, that's what's happening now in the grand jury investigation in Ferguson, and we're going to be talking to Jakari Jackson and Joe Biggs later in the program. And we're also going to talk about what a grand jury is, why they're using the grand jury. And we're going to talk about some of the issues there as well as the epidemic of police violence. But right now, I want to go to this story that, again, it's a story up on Infowars.com right now. It's the top story at the site. Court rules violent raid against homeschoolers is unconstitutional. The family was tased, assaulted, and pepper sprayed. But not only did they win this state court saying that the action of the SWAT team and CPS was unconstitutional, no, they are now going on the offensive. They are suing this jurisdiction. And let me read you from an article here. The D.C. Clothesline goes through it and lays down exactly what happened in this encounter. And, of course, it was just last week that they filed a lawsuit. Looks like they may win this lawsuit if the court slapped down these police and CPS for what they did. Very critical of what they did. But let me read to you first what it was that they did. The agents were sent to the home, CPS agents, because these people were homeschooling their children and reportedly had a, quote, messy house. They had a messy house, so they get a visitation from CPS. The family had been harassed by CPS agents on multiple occasions, and on this particular day, they refused to let the agents inside the home. The father said they were not allowed to enter the property without a court order. Nevertheless, one of the sheriff's deputies responded by forcing his way into the home and spraying the father and mother in the face with pepper spray. Next, he used his taser on the father, shooting him in the back with a weapon. Horrified, the mother shut the door to separate herself and her husband from the officer, who then triggered the taser 3 more times through the closed door, as the barbs were still stuck inside the husband. Then the second officer helped the first officer, who's tasered these people, force open the door, found both the couple lying on the floor in pain. The officers then pepper sprayed the couple as they laid on the floor. With the couple subdued, the officers then turned to the family dog. There we go, puppy side. They didn't shoot it, however. They just sprayed it with a chemical agent, then threatened to shoot it if it did not stop barking. At the end of the raid, the couple was arrested. Both of them were charged with resisting arrest and child endangerment. They then took their children away from them for quite some time. Now, let me read you, that's the basis of the lawsuit. Let me read you what the court in Missouri said. Again, this is in Missouri, like Ferguson. But this is not a Missouri issue. This is a national issue. And this is not a black thing. These people, I don't know if they were black, but I don't think they were black. This is a blue thing. This is the police not under control with rules of engagement, not following the law. And that's what a court said in Missouri. A court in Missouri has ruled a raid staged against a homeschooling family in 2011 violated their constitutional rights. And Kurt Nemo points out in this article on Infowars.com that they lost custody of their children for months after this raid. The children were traumatized by witnessing the police assault on their parents. The court has now ruled the raid was unconstitutional. Here's the quote from the court. They said, the court will not allow an exception to sanction warrantless entry into a private residence by pepper spray and taser. If the officer had a warrant in hand and such force was necessary, that's a different story. But those are not the facts of this case. And unfortunately, they are not the facts of many, many, many cases. They go on to write, the Fourth Amendment strikes a carefully crafted balance between a family's right to privacy and the government's need to enforce the law. Now, they were defended by the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. If you are homeschooling and you do not have contact with the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, you need to support them. They are a very useful advocate if you ever come into a situation like this. They went on to say, the rule applies to all government agents, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association says. Court after court has agreed there is no social services exception to the Fourth Amendment. And they also cited a law professor at Duke University who wrote a treatise, Storming the Castle to Save the Children, the ironic costs of child welfare exception to the Fourth Amendment. She said, violent police raids can shatter the innocence of even the youngest of children, causing a broad range of emotional responses, including trauma, anxiety, fear, shame, guilt, stigmatization, powerlessness, self-doubt, depression, and isolation. You know, we've seen this happen. We talked about this last week. As I said, this is not a black thing. This is a blue thing. We need to get control of law enforcement. And again, this kind of action we've seen sanctioned and approved over and over again because of the explosion of SWAT team raids, as we talked about last week in Frank Serpico's op-ed piece that he wrote for Politico last month. He pointed out that in his day, the real issue was corruption within the police force. Now it is an epidemic of violence within the police force. And I would suggest that both of those things have come from drug prohibition. We've had many times James Gierach from the police and prosecutors who are against prohibition. LEAP, it's Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, is actually the organization. We've had him on many times talking about how prohibition corrupts, and we've all seen it with the movies, with the newsreels, with the documentaries about alcohol prohibition. We know how that created a black market monopoly for organized crime, how it corrupted law enforcement and government. We have seen the same thing happen in our country with drug prohibition. The difference is that drug prohibition has been allowed to run its course now for multiple decades. And it's this kind of violence that is now being directed against many of the people who would never have thought about drugs, but would have approved this kind of violent reaction from the government to try to interdict drugs. We need to understand that the solution to everything is not government, and it's not government violence. We'll be right back. We're going to cover Ferguson. We're going to have our reporters in Ferguson, and we're going to have Paul Joseph Watson joining us in the next hour. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight. On this Monday, November 24th, 2014, I'll be your host today. We'll have Paul Joseph Watson joining us from the UK in the second hour. Our reporters, Jakari Jackson and Joe Biggs, joining us from Ferguson, Missouri in the third hour or earlier if there's an announcement from the grand jury. Now, before we get back to the news, I want to let you know about our newsletter. Many of you may not be aware of our new newsletter. You know, every day we see attempts to censor and control the internet. Of course, the FCC is working to control the internet. They're working to control its content. We've seen CISPA and SOPA, ACTA, PIPA, many different legislative approaches that have been put forward and have been rejected because of the people getting involved and the population saying we don't want our internet content controlled. Yet they're going to bring that back. They're going to push that through with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Transatlantic Partnerships, these trade agreements that are being negotiated. They're going to do that in the back door, just as Obama could not get his agenda through legislatively, so he just does it by decree. They're also going to do internet control by decree, by a secretly negotiated treaty. So every day we see Infowars.com being blocked around the world, but there's one way that you can make sure that you can get the information, and that is subscribing to our new newsletter. You can escape the internet censorship right now. You can get the latest and breaking news, exclusive behind-the-scenes videos, daily stories that are not available on Infowars.com and are only viewable by newsletter subscribers. It's free. And this week, we are launching some very huge specials on Infowars Gear, Infowars Life that are entirely unprecedented. Only newsletter subscribers will be given advanced notice 24 hours beforehand. Now, you can subscribe to this, as they're showing if you're watching this right now, the video feed. You can subscribe to Infowars Underground Insider right now on the homepage, on the sidebar at Infowars.com, or visit Infowars.com/newsletter to get the exclusive daily content and today's behind-the-scenes video, as well as check out our previous exclusive newsletter content. Now, just before the break, we were talking about this particularly egregious case, although, you know, it's not isolated, unfortunately. We see SWAT team raids coming in, throwing flashbang grenades into the cribs of children because they haven't done their research, their due diligence. Many cases, we see SWAT team raids being conducted that have not gotten the proper paperwork. But even if they have the proper paperwork, do we really want to have these no-knock raids? Do we really want to allow officers to go to a home where a family has been accused of having a messy house? Do we really want them to go and harass people, and then when they're told, get a search warrant if you want to come back and harass me again, they bust through the door, they taser the mother and father, they pepper spray the mother and father, they pepper spray the dog, threaten to shoot the dog? Do we really want to live in that kind of a country? See, it's not just black people. It's not just homeschoolers. You could be walking down the street and somebody, or you could be in a store and somebody could finger you. There's of course, a movement now in the case that was in Ohio, in the Walmart. I believe it was in Ohio. The fellow who was let's see, I'm looking at the newsletter here. Nevertheless, it's a story, yes, Ohio. The story where, if you remember, back in August, we covered it here at Infowars.com, the man who was going through Walmart, he was shopping for gifts. He'd picked up a toy BB gun. He was on the phone with his wife, talking to her, and she hears the incident happen. Somebody in the store had called 911 and said there's a man threatening people with a gun. Now, subsequent video footage showed that was absolutely a lie. Nevertheless, the police showed up, shot him dead. The wife, who's listening to the phone call, hears the police say, "Get down on the ground," and shots go out. And then he's down on the ground because they didn't wait for him to even comply. So when we look at that happening in a Walmart, when we look at that happening to these homeschoolers, we look at a lot of these different things that are happening on a daily basis. We see in Utah, the killings by the Utah police are outpacing gang, drug, child abuse homicides. In this article from the Salt Lake City Tribune, they say over the past 5 years, more Utahns have been killed by police than by gang members or by drug dealers or from child abuse. So far this year, deadly force by the police has claimed more lives, 13, including a Saturday shooting in South Jordan. They've claimed more lives by the police shootings than has violence between spouses and dating partners. As the tally of fatal police shootings rises, law enforcement watchdogs say it's time to treat deadly force as a potentially serious public safety problem. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to cover what's going on with the grand jury. How is it being used here? What is a grand jury? How is it different from a regular jury? You need to understand what the law is, especially what juries do. You need to be enforcing your rights as a juror in jury nullification. But we're going to talk about what a grand jury is when we come back. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
The globalist social engineers are not just targeting us with propaganda. They are manipulating our genetics. We are being targeted at every level by estrogen mimickers that lower our testosterone and other hormones and natural compounds that the body needs. After consulting top doctors, nutritionists, pharmacists, and others, we have developed what I believe is the ultimate non-GMO organic super male vitality formula sourced from powerful organic herbs and then concentrated for maximum potency. Super Male Vitality was developed to activate your body's own natural processes instead of using synthetic chemicals. Super Male Vitality by InfoWars Life is so powerful that I only take half the recommended dose. For a limited time, we are offering 15% off Super Male Vitality at InfoWarsLife.com to introduce you to this powerful supplement. Visit InfoWarsLife.com today to secure your Super Male Vitality. InfoWarsLife.com.